as well as showing you a little bit of introduction to the process. And then I've got some examples that I'd like to highlight for you. From there, I'm going to turn it over to Darren, allow him to go through on how some of this stuff is actually being done, a little step-by-step there. And then I believe that he's got some examples as well for you. So quite a lot when we go into user group meetings and some of the other seminar type things that we do, our customers are pretty blunt to ask, why as a CAD company are we getting involved with this type of a product or in this area? Really what I think that we've come across is when we made this transition from 2D to 3D back in the day, customers started to realize that they had other means where they could now start to use some of that engineering information and share it. And I don't know that this was a forecasted benefit to go into 3D originally, but it definitely grew into one over time. And now customers have these models that they can show, they're 3D, they're relative to what the real world looks like. So if they want to communicate what their product is, or if there's a special nuance or something like that for them, they can now explain that to their customers without hoping that their customers or somebody else knows how to read that 2D drawing. So from that perspective, I think that we've kind of grown into, well, what are we going to do next? And how are our customers utilizing some of this stuff? In talking with a lot of them, we find that this information that's being created from an engineering perspective is actually, more so now not just going from engineering to manufacturing, but sales, marketing, customer support. Everybody is utilizing this information to try to communicate better with the customers or the end user of these products. And with that, what kind of information is being created? And what we found is it's sales presentations, it's links to websites, it's interactive post-sales information so they can service their customers besides what's being generated internally. And from there, really what we had to do then is dig into, if our customers are going to use this type of information and use our tool to create this type of information, how can we help them become more efficient in getting that information out or utilizing it internally? And it was like in the lower left corner, you'll see in the documentation block there, I think that first bullet point is the #1 reason that we come across with our customers is, a bottleneck to this process is the engineers are being asked to create these pictures. And, whether it be a different shade, a different angle, can we put a background on there, change the exploded view a little bit. And they can do it. They've got the tool, they've got the models, but there's really no benefit for them to do that. And they have another job to do. So, what we hear most often is, man, this is good information, but getting it can be very difficult just from, if not a time constraint, just a bandwidth issue with the amount of personnel in engineering anymore. The other thing is taking some of that information and being able to communicate it up front in the sales process. How do we take a very complex, say, machine design and show it to our customers in a very effective and efficient format so we can communicate what we feel our benefit is in the hopes of winning some more of this business? And a lot of times, from a sales perspective, we're taking customer files from before or something that we've designed or engineered before. Maybe we want to make a little tweak or a little modification to it. Don't really want to invest that upfront engineering time to get that stuff developed, but would maybe like to show things a little bit differently. So those are the areas where we found mostly on a sales perspective that we want to try to be able to help you communicate with your customers. The problem has been, if we're going to use this 3D information and not rely on the engineer, how are we going to get it to somebody else? And if we're talking about engineering information, how do we make sure that it's secure? And how do we make sure that whoever's going to be utilizing it doesn't necessarily, might not have that CAD background? And that's where the Composer tool comes into play, which will be a focus of some of what Darren's going to be showing a little bit later. In essence, this tool is designed for anybody who's not an engineer, not a designer, to be able to take the 3D files that are being transferred over from engineering and be able to manipulate them in a fashion that they see fit to best present whatever they're trying to communicate. And then what that in turn allows them to do is, with these files coming over and them having more control, we streamline that gap between engineering and the other departments in creating this information considerably. So we can create different information using this type of tool besides the normal photo rendering that you might use in SOLIDWORks. And while you can do animations in SOLIDWORks, this tool provides us, again, a lot more flexibility without having to worry about, a CAD seat being utilized by a non-engineering type person. We've got exploded views that we can do, vector graphics. These are typically stuff that are going to be used in the sales and marketing environment, just for cleaner pictures. Obviously, high resolution images are all sales and marketing. I don't think engineering is too worried about, those sort of things when it comes to designing parts. Shaded illustrations, interactive DLMs is something I think that Darren's going to touch on at least a little bit later, and that's something that we're getting a lot of communication officers, because they want to be able to, sell these replacement parts, or be able to have their customers find the replacement part number so they can order what they need to without necessarily tying somebody up on a phone in technical support or service. Silhouettes and things like that are, again, visual type things that get used in marketing literature and marketing brochures, storyboard type information, but more importantly would be something like these video animations. The benefit to the video animations is we don't need any sort of translation or word format to be able to go along with them to communicate. No matter what language you speak, or you're able to really get an idea of what's going on and what needs to happen. So ideally, what we're talking about in this process, and going from where we used to be a few years ago to where customers are using this information now, and how we want to be able to help, is take that information that we know that customers are generating out and be able to create. That workflow process should be more streamlined. It should be easier to get that stuff done. And that's what SOLIDWORks has always been about beginning with. And want you to continue to clearly communicate and use that 3D information the way that you feel that it's going to have the most impact to you. And at the same time, what's important enough of look is, instead of waiting until engineering's done and everything's finalized, to actually be able to start working on this stuff earlier in the process. So, ratio. If you want to start getting your new ideas out to the market sooner than maybe what development time is going to allow, you have anything else to you. It's already set up. You can already be working on it. You don't have to wait until everything's all finalized and then try to crunch that down into a couple of days. You really need a couple of weeks. So if you be a composer tool, it's going to allow you to take some of that 2D information, spruce it up, make it look more pretty, without having to, again, have that on the engineering plate. More importantly, it's going to take the 3D information, and it actually lightens that metadata from the engineering file and allows, again, non-engineering type personnel to be able to access that and create the type of stuff that they feel best communicates whatever message they're trying to deliver. And all of that, again, is being done so we can better communicate with our customers. We want our message very clear. We don't want to have any confusion. We want to make sure that everybody gets the point about what our product's doing, not having to have that drafting background, I guess. The process is pretty straightforward. We're not really trying to layer them on. Basically, you're taking your engineering information that's going to be put into the 3D Via Composer tool, where somebody in another department has the ability to manipulate those files or work with those files, and then from there be able to do the documentation output that you're looking for. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to let some of these play, but I wanted to give you a couple of examples. So this first one here for Westport is an example of a very large assembly. And what you're going to see, they used to do in SOLIDWORks, and it was usually about a 3-week process. I think between a 2 and a 3-week process. When they started using the Composer tool, based on the advanced capabilities with exploded views, the fact that it actually lightens auto load, they were able to create this animation in more or less, like a 2-day time frame compared to a 2 or 3 week time frame. There's different versions of it. This one is a little bit more straightforward. It was more automation put to this than actual user setup. But again, it gives you an idea just in the size of this assembly, what kind of stuff can be created.
Just for everybody's sake who's watching this too, obviously the bandwidth on a presentation like this is pretty tough. So if there's anything that you see that you'd like to see in better detail, we can do this offline after the presentation.
Another area where we tend to get feedback from in regards to creating, some of these screenshots is the fact that when you do create you got a nice picture out of your CAD system that you create that screenshot of. The problem typically is when you open it up, if you need to explode that, you're going to lose a lot of that clarity. And being able to output some of these vector type is really nice using something like Composer tool. In this example here, we look at this air vent meshing on the table. Typically, if you were going to blow this up after a screenshot, that detail would get lost very quickly if you distort it. When you're in the Composer tool and being able to create those vector graphics, you can see that we don't lose any of that detail. So this way, no matter what size you're trying to utilize, you've always got the ability, again, to be able to take those images, blow them up, and look at some of those more detailed breakaway views and things like that. This one here, because we're trying to go with an interactive customer experience as well. And what we can do here, we're going to see a VW engine. And being an engineered vehicle means it runs well, but it's not always the easiest thing to service. And we've actually communicated with some of the other OEMs when it comes to using a distributor network to be able to communicate part swap outs, changes, things like that. How do we train such a vast majority of people very efficiently and effectively? So this gives you a basic example of some of the things that can be created. It's going to step us through the process of being able to change out the spark plug within this engine. Now this is where the interactivity with your customer becomes very important, because one of the things is you want them to be able to be engaged. You also want everybody sees things or understands things at a little bit different pace, so you want them to have the ability to absorb the information or go back or go forward depending on what they may need to do. But in this example here, what it's asking me to do is interact with the model or with the file So it wants me to touch on these blinking parts in order to keep the process going and move on past step 1. Now, as you're going to see, it's going to continue to step us all through this process by a simple mouse click. And now here's our spark plug. And obviously, to put it in, you will reverse order. But a lot of different things. This is more of a lightweight type of version of what can be done. Some of the things that Darren may be showing later, you'll see that you can actually put next buttons. You can do interactive clicks within there, more so than what you're seeing just on the part. It might be some sort of a menu-driven thing. We might have a home type of button. So there's a lot of different examples that you can create in there, again, to get your customer engaged or interactive with how they're interfacing with your information. The other benefit to it is there's different ways that that information can be shared. And I know Darren's going to cover some of that in his presentation. But you want to be able to try to communicate with your customers in a fashion that they're still comfortable with, but at the same time try to be able to use some of these more high-tech type tools in order to present a better image of what your product is, what your company has to offer. So with that, I am going to now turn it over to Darren, and you guys can see how some of that information or some of those visuals are being created.
All right, everybody. I'm going to reinforce a lot of the stuff that Brian just talked about by showing a little bit more of the actual creation of some documents and at least how we get from point A to point Z on some of the things that you've seen. Pretty much demystify how these things take place, because the outputs that we're going to show you here are definitely a sweet spot that this tool is very good for. And it addresses concerns that some customers currently have, but it also is kind of a vision of the future for you guys out there that might not necessarily have a good method in place yet. I'm going to run another quick poll here for a second just to get a little lay of the land and find out how everybody out there today is typically doing these types of things. So we really would just want to know, how are you communicating either internally or externally or both, how your assembly, disassembly documents or service instructions take place. We've got actually quite a variety of mix on this one as I'm watching the answers come in, and I'll post this out for everybody to see. Basically, we have a pretty heavy mix of everything that's taking place. The one in the middle is kind of what I expected to see a lot of. People are taking screenshots, either via CAD or whatever other method you have, but typically it's out of the CAD system, and then either pasting those in or embedding those directly into Word, Excel, Publisher, InDesign. Variety of tools to get a similar purpose done. Exploded views from CAD are obviously very typical, and sometimes it's exploded views from CAD that are then turned into screenshots and put into Word or Illustrator or something like that. The digital pictures one is the one that always concerns me the most, for those of you who answered that way, because what that requires obviously is actual product. Now, when you have actual product, then you've produced something, and the biggest issue I see is that if the document changes or if the design changes, now replacement parts for that actual product have to be generated, then assembled, and then those digital pictures actually snapped again if a change takes place. So in my opinion, digital pictures really lend themselves more to a redo than a simple update when it comes to those kind of things. And then I'm glad to see people out there using viewers and e-drawings to communicate more virtually, less paper involved. So those are all pretty cool. Okay, so let's continue on here a little bit. Basically what I want to run into for starters here is just get into the composer interface for everybody. And most everybody out there has seen this, unless you're absolutely new to what we're showing today. But basically, Composer is a CAD neutral type of tool. It enables people to actually open up files that are from native CAD systems. Simple File Open here gives us an opportunity to open up CATIA native, both V4 and V5. Gets down to Pro Engineer native parts and assemblies, as well as SOLIDWORKS native parts and assemblies. And then the other neutral files, which give us opportunities to read any type of CAD product. So ASIS, the Parasolid stuff, the IGES and STEP stuff are all in there as well. So that stuff really gives us opportunities to read pretty much any file out there. When it comes into Composer, it comes in directly with the colors that you see here. The assembly structure is completely retained. You'll get more or less data in the feature tree here just based on the system that you get it from. But SOLIDWORKS native files, CATIA native files, and things like that not only have the file names and structures, but also all the meta properties, any of the file properties that you've created within SOLIDWORKS. So there's a lot of things that we can glean for visual sake, for label sake, bills of materials, and such. Now, mainly what we do is we start off by generating views, and the first part of this is going to be all about how to get different types of, lack of a better terms, screenshots in this case. Over on the left-hand side, what you see is my Views tab, and the Views tab contains a series of images that will represent yet to be created JPEGs, PNGs, TIFFs, or bitmaps, or so on. Now, to create an image like this, it's really nothing more than capturing what's on the screen. I can move from one view to another and basically see the transition from one view to the next. And in different situations, you'll see different things. But hopefully the one thing that everybody is noticing here are those collaborative actors, those arrows, the little detailed views that we have popping up. All of that stuff is really things that I could never do in a CAD system, regardless of whether I was using screenshots or not. They are 3D elements, so if I start to rotate this assembly around, you'll actually see that those images, those features are actually in the 3D space. All those arrows happen to be. And they really depict the changes from one view to another. Now I'm going to quickly create a view like this. So I'm going to start off with my original home view. In this case, I want to really depict how to remove the battery, just to give you an example of the functionality that this takes. The tool itself was actually designed for non-CAD people to be made a little bit easier and also lighter on the hardware, because typically the non-CAD person has a hand-me-down computer of 3 to 5 plus years old. So we've made the system so when it imports the CAD data, it actually turns it into XML data. Now the manipulation on screen is through basic middle mouse button rotates, pans, and basic drag and drop. So what I want to do is just quickly disassemble this battery section here. We'll use a simple control pick. I'm going to grab both of these fasteners. And then just using the basic translate tool, we're served up with a nice color-coded triad, which all I have to do is grab one of the axes and simply drag those parts to where they make sense. Continuing on, I'm going to go ahead and grab this cover. We'll drag that out just a little bit. And then the rubber seal that's on the inside. And finally, our battery. Now, there is an element of auto-explode capabilities that we have as well, but not really the focus of what we're trying to do today. The additional actors that we can add are under our author tool, and these include 3D callouts and labels, images that you might want to bring in, both 2D raster and vector, and things like our 3D arrows. Now the arrows are nice because they actually snap right to the geometry. I can go ahead and hover over top of this fastener, and it actually grabs the axis of that fastener. It's a simple process of me clicking in place to determine the length of that feature. And we'll do it on both fasteners. Again, clicking in the window. Now these types of elements, these collaborative actors, actually work exactly the same way as the geometry that you see out there. I can multi-select those. I can use the same translate tool to reposition and manipulate their locations. We can even go ahead and start modifying things like the thickness. Maybe make that from 2 to 4. That looks pretty good. And we'll turn off stay on top so that it actually looks like those arrows go down the holes that they are actually positioned down. Once again, if I rotate, you'll be able to see that those arrows are a 3D element within this assembly. Color is another thing I'll change briefly here. We'll just simply drag along this color stripe or just grab the color grid and grab a specific red color. But basically we have properties that control the visuals of everything we're looking at. When I'm satisfied, I simply save a view, which captures the image of what we have on screen. That enables me to simply transition from one view to another. Now you can see arrows transitioning from this view to the next view. And we rotate that around and we actually see the animation of the explode that takes place within this view. And that's more interactive. But what we're looking for from this is the first part here, which is just going to be static images. We have an opportunity to save a variety of image types. We're going to start off with raster-based images. With those, we bring in our workshop. You basically have full control over the pixel size, width, DPI, and all the little settings that you would have for this particular image. On screen, we have a preview of the actual boundary that we have set up by the width and the height that I'm currently showing over in my settings. But you can set up different profiles. So if I was doing cover imagery, that would be a portrait, which is going to be 1950 by 2550, versus just different views that might show up inside of a document, which in this case we're going to go by 877 by 620. The main thing here is that we're saving out image files. So in this case, what I want to do is actually click Save As. And with one simple checkbox selected, I'm actually going to make views or images for every single one of these views that we see over on the left-hand side. A simple Save As will enable me to go ahead and place these images in a folder. Let me just simply hit Save. And it will now kick off an image for every single one of those views. Now if I access that folder that we have on my desktop, what you actually see is a folder now full of all of these JPEGs, 877 pixels by 600 pixels. And when I double click and activate each of those, you can see that we have quite a nice high quality image. It is a raster based image, so if we start to zoom in, you're going to see the pixels get larger. But it's a very quick way to set these up and have nice, accessible, and updatable screenshots as a result of what we see on the screen right now. Now, in a different demonstration, what we would actually do is an update to the Cad file, which would actually update these images. But we're not going to get into that right now. These images typically would be embedded, hopefully linked, because that's where you really get the associativity, but linked into Adobe Illustrator, Adobe InDesign, Microsoft Publisher, or Word, and so on. So that's where we get this nice collateral. Now, from there, we want to go ahead and get some more usable type imagery out of this. And we're going to kind of move off of just static images now and move into animations with what we have on the screen currently. So let me just go ahead and collapse my workshop over here on the side so I get a little bit more of a window. And we're going to switch gears here for a second and just show the animation timeline. So we'll go over from our image mode and actually get into our animation mode. Now, animations are very simple within Composer. This is all keyframe-based animations. So I can go ahead and change something from 1 second on the timeline to another, and it will capture what's happened between those changes. Now, we can also use the images that we have over here in our Views tab as what I refer to as more of a poor man's animation, but frankly, they can be used as the animation if you want to control this and then inevitably export this as an AVI file. By simply grabbing the views that I have in my Views tab and dropping them on the timeline, what I'm essentially doing is setting up an animation. Now, I like to always grab the same view and drop it in a couple of times, and that means nothing's happening between each of those views as I drag this time bar around. But if I then go ahead and transition over to, say, this view, let's go over to about 3 seconds there, maybe go to about 3.5, and then I'm just going to continue to drag views onto the screen. We'll go ahead and just check out this jaw removal, and that one's fine. And I'm actually going to speed this up and move over to my battery removal that I've just made for you. Now, by dragging all of these things on the timeline, what we're actually doing is enabling all of this imagery to show up based on seconds, not just based on one view after another. And when we hit play, we'll be able to see what just simply dragging those views to the timeline does for us. Now, mine's going excessively quick on my screen, and you're not seeing this very well. I've got a second computer I'm watching so that you can see how this happens. So I'm going to do a quick manipulation here. What I'm actually going to do is take what is now a 10-second animation, and I'm simply going to select it and make it a lot longer. We'll bump that up to about 28 seconds. Now, what that'll hopefully do for you guys out there in webinar land is to actually slow this down so you can see some of these transitions a little bit better. Watch that timeline move. Maybe not so much. There we go. That's not too bad. This is a nice, full action, very smooth animation when we're looking at this on our screens here. And as I mentioned, over the webinar, bandwidth is always an issue. So if there's any of these types of things that you want to see more dynamically, please let us know and we'll go ahead and do something a little bit more live with you as well. But this is now a file that I can simply go ahead and do a save as, kick it off as an AVI file, and send it to anybody with a media player. So static, but very, very interactive when it comes to the types of details that we can add into these types of images that isn't available in SolidWorks or any other CAD system and their basic animation type tools. Now, all of this type of stuff has these static outputs. The static outputs are nice, but we really can get more interactive when it comes down to the inputs if we're using a viewer to actually go ahead and disseminate this to people. Now, a viewer to see what I just showed you on the screen here is actually an easy thing because much like e-drawings inside of SolidWorks, what we can do inside of Composer is simply take the file that we're looking at here and do a simple file, save as, and make it a package. And what a package does is it sends it as an executable. That means your recipient does not have to download anything. You simply double-click the file, and it runs inside the viewer that I'm going to show you in a moment. Before this, though, the viewer has so many benefits, it's almost hard to get into this 45-minute session here. But really, what it allows for is some very dynamic input, very dynamic interaction, as Brian was showing, but also gives you some security mechanisms. As I save this off as a secure package file, we can password protect this quite easily. If you enable measurement, you can go ahead and reduce the accuracy so that some of the parts actually get more generic types of text instead of the actual measurements, so people can't reverse engineer. But what it also allows you is come down here to the Rights Manager and turn on and off interactivity features within the tool for the recipient. So they could actually use the cutting plane tool or generate bills of materials. Or if this thing has a particular life, you can time bomb the file by giving it an expiration date, typical days, or just simply selecting on the calendar when this file is good, start and end dates. So it's a neat tool for those types of things and quite powerful in that respect. Just go ahead and simply hit save, and then that will generate a nice executable file that a recipient will simply double-click. Now, when they get these types of files inside the viewer, this is where the interaction really begins to take place. We're starting to do this more and more for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is, and I want to bring up this little article here just to show you what this looks like. We've seen more and more of this type of thing happening. iPhones are quite prevalent now that Verizon has it. There's a lot more people even on it than there was before. And most people develop applications simply for the iPhone and Android markets due to the power. But currently with the iPhone, there is a Composer Viewer application available. And we're getting more and more to a situation where we have gentlemen like this who have the iPhone strapped to their shoulder or their forearm that are actually running the assembly guide right there from their iPhone. So they don't even have a computer station nearby. He's using a torque wrench, he's got the instructions on his forearm, and everything he needs is right there at his fingertips, literally. So we really want to feed into this type of an interaction and get more and more paperless and more efficient as a result of that. And you can do that by using these interactive files within the viewers. First one that I want to show you is going to more or less enforce what Brian was saying earlier. This is a file we did for Orange County Choppers a couple of years ago. And what's great about this is that the recipient can have this viewer on their forearm or on a computer, touchscreen type device or an iPad, and basically run through this by following the prompts. So if we hit the play button, that's going to simply start the assembly process. And as Brian described, interactivity means that this thing has an animation in it, but the animation pauses waiting for user interaction, either based on a file or a part here that's blinking at us, or a simple button that pops up and says, do the next step, repeat the last step. And that will allow a user to then click and interact and have it go on to the next portion of whatever takes place. So we put the hubs and sprockets in. It's now waiting for us to select these cross bolts. All of those will go in. Now that that's done, it waits for us to finish our process, and we can simply click the tire, and it will insert. Waiting for us again. Now we have our axle. And you kind of get the idea that within Composer, in the viewer, there's a lot more to it than just a static AVI file that runs from start to finish. The recipient also has complete capabilities to rotate this thing outside of whatever position it was when it was generated. And based on what the save properties were with the Rights Manager, the recipient here actually has the ability to go ahead and generate cutting planes. So if he wanted to see inside this, he could add a cutting plane on the fly and go right through the middle there and see what's actually taking place within this particular assembly. So these are things that were not prescribed for the user, but it's an additional interaction available to the user himself. So quite powerful things. We can continue to select, and we can continue to have these images update and move on. That said, There's also some other interesting interaction that can take place when it comes to just marketing your files. In this particular case, we have a car that's showing up on the screen, and a simple button will display a nice color palette. Now the color palette's cool because you can click on a color and it will simply change the color of the car on the fly. Now not only is this a neat interaction just to be able to see the different versions of that car, but the user can actually select on a door and the door opens, and select on windows and the windows drop. So there's a lot of things built into this file that really allow for a nice enjoyable experience by the user. If they zoom in even closer, you'll be able to see the leather textures on the seats that we have here. Move that over a little bit for you. So kind of a neat thing. I think the mirrors actually move too. So kind of cool. But that's the interactivity that this type of a tool garners for us. Now if we're just simply playing an animation within this tool, it's just another way to disseminate things. Because for any of you who know anything about AVI files, you know, a good 1.5-minute long file could very easily be 400 or 500 megs, which is just one of those things about AVI files. If you have an MPEG compressor, you can go ahead and take care of the compression there. But within the viewer here, we're actually looking at this break service file. And just for my own sake, I'm actually going to go ahead and look at what this file size actually is. So break service file, it's about 3 megs. But we can play the animation from within the viewer and not have to kick off an AVI file that's excessively large. So here we're showing the fasteners being removed. And again, it's much more smooth real-time on the screen here than you're seeing over the webinar, but it does describe exactly the steps taken to service something. Go ahead and zoom in and see exactly what needs to take place. A little DeWalt screwdriver there. And then the removal of those features. And maybe a little compressed air for good measure. So those are the kind of things that the viewer really does help with, and it can be disseminated out to anybody through a simple free download or by providing the nice embedded package files that are going to have that in there. The other way that this can actually be disseminated out is by taking your files within Composer and actually doing a file publish to HTML. As an HTML file, it builds a web page with an embedded viewer automatically in it. And when a recipient actually goes to that web page, the experience that they're going to have on this one is actually going to look more like this. Now here's the file I'm actually playing with live in Composer, and now you're seeing it as saved as an HTML file. And the interactivity works here because, after all, what we're looking at right here, if I expand things out, is the Composer player embedded directly into the web page. So no muss, no fuss for anybody involved. Now when they click on any of these views, or when you have it saved in a static location, everything that we have here is completely interactive. If the user wants to drill down into a smaller part of this assembly, they can click on one of these images, and it will automatically transition them over to that view. Now the blinking that we're seeing now is actually relative to some drill down type situations, where if I want to see more deep into maybe the jaws that we have, we click on something that's blinking, and it will take us to the jaws step. What we're actually building into this interaction is more or less a back button. This image here takes us back to our home view. So I think an underutilized part of what we're doing here is the use of the viewer, because eDrawings Viewer stands out and is used quite significantly throughout the industry these days. And this tool is just as free and just as easy to use, and I think it really provides an incredible user experience for trying to get these points across in a very light file format when it all comes down to it. Now that said, there's one other interaction that I really enjoy within the Composer product, and that's what we refer to as SVG files. Got another version of this file that I've been messing around with that was used to generate some exploded views. And what you see on the screen is essentially a bill of materials that was generated from within Composer. These types of bills can be generated quite easily. It's really just a matter of selecting the components. Maybe in this case we'll do just a quick explode view just so you can see that these parts are separate from each other. So just grab a couple of parts out, and I think we got a ring in there or a washer of some sort. And using these particular parts, we can simply go ahead and generate callouts. There we go. So now we've got balloons, sizes can be changed, positions can be changed, everything can basically be updated just based on how you want this thing to look. That said, a simple click inserts the bill of materials, and that's really how these views are generated. Simply go ahead and update, and now I have a view. This view is going to be saved out as an image file as well. However, it's not going to be saved as a raster-based image. And this is where we get into some really high-order graphics here called Scalable Vector Graphics, or EPS, if you want to just do an encapsulated PostScript. Same type of file. But basically what this does is a vector-based interaction. If an individual saves the SVG file out, it's not just an image as you'd expect from any type of JPEG or bitmap. What you get on screen is a nice silhouetted image, which if I jump back to Composer for 1 second, I just want to be very deliberate here and show that you have control over line widths and thicknesses, both of the external edges, the silhouettes, and the internal construction edges. But from an interaction standpoint, wrong one there, sorry. From an interaction standpoint, a recipient can simply hover over the part and it will highlight on the bill of materials and its balloon will highlight. If you hover over the balloon, the other two will highlight, and if you hover over the bill of materials, we also get some high-end highlighting there. Now, by simply adding a hyperlink to any one of these parts, we now take this thing and we really emphasize the quality and capabilities here. This is just an SVG file. It's on a web page. And again, hovering over any one of these bill of materials items highlights the proper image and the proper call-out on screen. With any of these parts that have a hyperlink associated, when I click them, they simply jump to the next SVG file, in this case drilling down into this assembly. Hovering again will go ahead and give us the same type of previews. In this case I have 4 of these fasteners, so all 4 of them highlight. And if I hover over the battery assembly, we can actually drill down deeper into that. So this is a very light yet very, very interactive way to do these types of things. And if you associate this with maybe an order form that's got a button where maybe it pops up a nice Excel sheet that a recipient can then go ahead and fill out this number and send it to you for ordering replacement parts, that's really the ultimate goal of trying to allow the customers to drill into these assemblies. Because after all, they don't really know what your part numbers are. They just might have a broken part in their hand and know what it should have looked like. And by giving them this graphical input, they can easily go ahead and drill into the assembly and get the information they need directly off of these types of files. I'm going to go ahead and open it up to questions right now.
There was one question that kind of came up in the middle in regards to the copy of the presentation. If you want to send us an email, we absolutely can send that out. There was a lot of AVI type files and some of the larger files as well, you know, that may not be the best thing to email, so we can coordinate with you on that. And this will also be put to our archive.
All right, while we're waiting for some questions, I'm just going to launch that last poll, Brian.
All right.
And just get a little bit of feedback for everybody. We want to make sure that everything is worth your time, so you know, please just fill this out and let us know if you saw anything interesting. And even if it just caught your interest but you want to know more, we'll be glad to come out and do an on-site demonstration live and show you exactly what it takes to get from start to finish with the things that we showed today. So please feel free to get a hold of us in the future and maybe look at something a little bit more specific to exactly what you do.
Somebody that you paid obviously popped in there because it said, "Well done, Darren." No, I'm just kidding. Good shit. I'm playing.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike.
Now, it looks like we've got one in there. It says, how do you take a 3D part from SolidWorks and transfer it to Mastercam or any other tooling program to produce the part?
Mastercam actually recently has regained their gold partner status with SolidWorks, which means Mastercam will actually run single window inside SolidWorks. Now, if you don't have the latest versions of Mastercam, since their version 9, which is going on 5 years old or more now, Mastercam has been able to read a SolidWorks.SLD PRT native part file. And there's some interactivity between Mastercam and SolidWorks where if the part does change, Mastercam will actually associatively prompt you to update those G codes. So Mastercam, CamWorks, and I believe FeatureCam are the 3 main ones that will actually do a full gold partner single window stuff inside of SolidWorks. But either way, Mastercam does read a native SolidWorks part file.
All right. Again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to give us a holler or send us an email, and we will get you whatever information you need.
Yep, and we do
Thank
appreciate
you again for taking your lunch. Yeah, thanks for taking your lunch out and spending it with us today.
Yep, totally. All right, everybody, thank you very much. Look forward to having you join another webinar in the future. Take care.